Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual session with Patrick Baumann. He is a St. Cloud alumni and also currently a Google engineer. Due to some technical difficulties, we missed the first few points, but wasn't much just an introduction. So I can continue watching the rest of the session.
Excel,
Thank
but
you.
I got by. I got the grades I needed and did enough work to get those grades, and that was about it. I had some idea when I was in high school that I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. I'm not sure where that exactly came from, but I enjoyed math and figured that sounds like something I could do. Um, Before graduation, I got an offer to attend NDSU, but made one of the better choices in my college career, which was not going that route and instead trying to get my generals at a local community college, Normandale Community College, if any of you are familiar. The reason I say that was the best choice I had made is because I tried to continue the effort levels that I did with high school in college, and that didn't work out very well. I actually got academic suspension after, I think, 3 semesters at Normandale. Pretty embarrassing to go to a community college and essentially flunk out of it. So it was a bit of a wake-up call. After thinking a bit about what I actually wanted to do, realizing I liked technology, like the current tech, I had a website that me and a couple guys maintained. I realized that software, leaning something a little more software than something like mechanical engineering was probably more my strength. And I actually had some faculty from St. Cloud State come to, I think, a physics class or something and present the computer engineering program, try to pitch the computer engineering program to the students. So everything he said clicked, sounded like something more interesting to me than staying at Normandale and struggling. So after taking a semester off, not my choice, but I ended up going back, got my GPA up to a respectable level, enough to transfer at the very least. I got accepted into St. Cloud State's computer engineering program, and I worked as hard as one should in college. Kept my GPA reasonable in the mid 3s, I think. And I noticed a lot of my classmates in what was approximately my sophomore year were trying to get internships. So I figured I should probably do something like that too. Applied to just about all the companies you could imagine in California because I happened to be dating someone long distance in California and figured if I can get an internship that happens to be in that state, that would be great. Unfortunately, I didn't hear anything from anyone until I think it was early April, late March. The Boeing company reached out and they were looking for I had applied for an internship, so the typical summer starts in June, goes until August or whatever it was. But they actually needed to fill a co-op position. And if you're unfamiliar, or if it goes by a different name with other companies, co-op is actually an extended internship. So it starts usually they start in the summer and they go all the way through fall. So I was excited that I got an opportunity, but I was a bit disappointed that if I took it, I would have to delay my graduation. Thankfully, I talked to Dr. Petzold. He was my advisor at the time. Mentioned the opportunity to him, and he said, "Oh, you have to take it. Don't try to graduate early if you can actually go out and get your foot in the door of the industry." So on his advice, I took it. We ended up sharing an apartment with 4 other guys that were in the same program. Worked on it was essentially a fancy accounts receivable tool that put together. It wasn't interesting work, but it was exciting to be actually doing something outside of just education. So the guys that I roomed with and a bunch of the people that were on the team that I built this tool for kept in touch with. And after I went back to school for only one semester, I went back for an internship with Boeing the following summer. This time it wasn't a co-op, but they were more than open to having me back, so I didn't have to worry about an internship my summer between junior and senior year. And then after I graduated in May of 2008, Boeing hired me on full-time. So I didn't go back to the same team that I was interning with, but because I was essentially already an employee there, they just had to sign some additional paperwork to get me on as my first post-graduation job. I worked at Boeing for, I want to say, 4.5, 5 years. And during that time, I took advantage of a program at Boeing that while you're a full-time employee, they will pay for any education costs that you incur. I think they had requirements like it had to be related to your career, so you couldn't just go out and completely change focus or something. But I took advantage of that, and I got my master's degree. However, one of the requirements of that program is you have to continue working for Boeing for several years after if you don't want to have to pay Boeing back for that education. So it seemed like the perfect thing. I went to Carnegie Mellon, it was a remote program. I was in Southern California with Boeing at the time, and I was doing a remote program with Carnegie Mellon in Silicon Valley or the Bay Area. Got my master's after 2 years, and very shortly after I got my master's, Amazon Recruiting reached out to me. And Amazon, like Google, is one of those places I never thought I would be able to work for. I figured small state school in Minnesota, and I can't be good enough to work for one of these companies, but they convinced me to come in and try anyway. I interviewed, did one of your typical tech interviews that takes half a day. And on the drive home, they actually called and made me an offer. So within an hour, they made me an offer. The offer was way better than the offer that I had at Boeing. And so it made it worth paying for my master's degree, essentially out of pocket from that point on, and going to work for Amazon. So I took the offer, worked for Amazon down in Southern California for about 3 years. And then a similar thing happened. There was a Google recruiter that had been reaching out for about a year, and I kept putting it off because, again, yeah, right. Like, okay, I got to Amazon, but Google feels like a whole different thing. There's no way I'm going to get to the company I've wanted to work for since I started going to college. So anyway, after much pushing and prodding and actually talking to a couple of people that I met at Amazon and eventually moved to Google themselves, I worked up the nerve to fly to the Bay Area, go through another typical tech interview. They typically go a half day, but they put me up in a hotel room for the night, so it was exciting. That response took a little bit longer, but after about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, they told me that they were making me an offer, and I've been at Google ever since. While I was at Google, I started on Google Play, the Google Play Store on Android. Spent about 6 months there, and then I got the opportunity to be the second engineer on Android Instant Apps. Today it's called, I think, Google Play Instant. It's essentially a way for you to run an app on your Android device without installing the full app. So you can kind of get a preview or a quicker version of the app than you would normally have to go through the install process. And while I was on that team, we worked pretty heavily with the Android framework team. And once we launched, I talked to some of the people that I worked with as part of Instant Apps, and they were interested in bringing me on to the framework team. So I've been on the framework team now for 3 years, and enjoying pretty much every part about it. I've launched a couple of a privacy feature this year in Android R. In Android Q, I got a basically rewrote the way that apps install on Android. So some pretty significant changes that, again, I never would have envisioned myself being a part of, 10 years ago when I was when I had just started at Boeing and was fairly fresh from St. Cloud State. So that's where I'm at. We'll open the floor for questions now, I guess, unless you had anything else you wanted me to touch on.
Thank you, Patrick, for sharing your story.
Mm-hmm.
It's inspiring in its own way. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot down in the chat. Or I have 3 questions on my own, or I'll be happy to share them with you. Just give it a minute for everyone to write down the questions. If you don't have, I'll start with the questions.
Okay.
All right. I'm getting none. So okay. I have one from John. John's our VP for our club. Says, what do you think made the recruiters contact you? Good question.
So in both cases, they reached out to me on LinkedIn. So I had from the early days of post-graduation, I had a LinkedIn profile. I included just about everything I could possibly come up with. I had actually, before getting my master's degree, I had a couple of recruiters reach out to me, but it was for small, I think one of them was like a Ruby on Rails developer, and they wanted to pay me less than I was making at Boeing to work on software that was less interesting to work on. So I got a couple of pings from recruiters on LinkedIn prior to getting my master's, but once I got my master's, I started getting the floodgates opened. I started getting a lot of people reaching out. So I would attribute my the first recruiter outreach that was interesting to me to my my master's degree from a reputable school, so from Carnegie Mellon. That said, I would say recruiters are mostly looking. I think a lot of recruiters that are trying to find the perfect candidates, they're looking for either outstanding education of some sort or work experience that's relevant to what they're looking for. So had I had a bit more work experience outside of the defense industry, that might have also conjured up a few pings from recruiters. So
thank you so much. We have another question from Samudin. So he says, what do you think makes upcoming software engineers marketable in the current market, besides project work and education?
I think those are the big ones. Unfortunately, like getting some experience in the industry is going to be your biggest, the biggest attention grabber, is going to make you the most marketable. So that includes work, extracurricular work you might do as part of your education. It might include open source project contributions. Hackathons and stuff like that are not quite as valuable as actual work experience, but they're definitely better than nothing. So any sort of experience you can get writing some sort of usable code that you can put on your resume, I think is the best thing you can do to make yourself marketable.
Thank you, Patrick. We have another question from Noah. It's more about the Google. So what's the environment like in Google? Is it challenging, fast-paced?
So the environment in Google is varied. It depends on the team you're on. It depends, and for what it's worth, I've experienced a wide spectrum just in the 3 major projects that I've worked on. Actually, I should say 4 major projects. When I first joined Google, I joined Google Play, which is a well-established, at the time it was an established project, or established product, I should say. That was fairly slow-moving, methodical. There were bugs and feature requests that were managed by a product engineer and project manager. So your work was very very predictable and measured, and it followed most of what you learn in software engineering courses. It was very easy to estimate, and you kind of knew what you were getting into every day, save a couple of fires here and there when something unexpected would happen. The second product that I work on was actually internal to Google. We had a sort of incubator hackathon type thing that we did, and me and 3 other guys put together a game video recording thing on Android, where you could, while you're playing a game, you could record the screen, and it was like a Twitch prototype sort of thing. That was completely wild. That was just the 3 of us hacking away day in, day out for a few months. That was, I think, the other extreme, where we were just building something for experimentation's sake. When I worked on instant apps, that was the whole spectrum. We started out very scrappy. Things were moving fast. We were trying things. Things were failing. We were trying something else. We were just trying to get this product off the ground, make it work. And then over time, it became much more akin to what we were working on in Google Play, much more structured. And on Android, it is kind of a mix of everything. When we're getting close to release, it can be very quick and fast, and everything is happening almost too fast at times. But in between releases, we have a lot of time to kind of slow down and build and try things. And so it depends entirely on what products you end up working on. And you as an engineer have a lot of control over where you end up within Google and what you want to work on. And so you can kind of make it what you want to Google it. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick, once again. So this time we have a question from Jesse about the interview. So now you interview with Amazon and Google. So do you have any tips on preparing for an interview of any kind?
So there's all the typical interview prep, like make sure you think of, make sure you know your resume well. So in tech interviews, they're not going to focus much on it, but they will ask you about your experience, ask you about, the typical questions like, tell me a time when you had an issue on your team, how did you resolve it? Tell me about a time that you encountered a problem you thought was insurmountable. What did you do? Who did you talk to? They'll ask you for, those kind of typical behavioral questions. But the thing that I think a lot of people are fearful of in tech interviews is the technical questions. So you will be, it's kind of changing across the industry, but the traditional tech interview involves whiteboard coding, problem solving real time, in front of someone. There's always that kind of, you will be nervous. I was nervous both times that I interviewed. And I actually did a bunch of other interviews when I interviewed at Google, just out of curiosity. None of them, I wasn't comfortable in any of them. So be prepared for that. Be prepared to learn how to deal with your nerves. And I think the best way you can do that is by practicing. Off the top of my head, I don't remember the book. I have a couple of books that I used with a bunch of technical interview questions. Just sample questions with solutions in the back. I bought the whiteboard behind me, still have that I bought for my Google interview prep 5-6 years ago. I have a whiteboard that I would just drill problems. I would run through problems, pretend I was talking to someone, explaining every step, try to get to the best solution I could, and then I go back and look at what the solution the book gave me, see if there were any improvements I could have made in mine, and then through practicing, I think I did 2 to 3 weeks of practicing an hour or two in the evenings, almost every night leading up to the interviews. And while I was very nervous during the interview, I was confident that I was able to solve most of the problems. The other thing to keep in mind, just as part of those technical problem solving questions, don't be afraid to ask questions. Interviewers look for you to ask questions, especially if they're questions that hint at part of the problem that they think is tricky. If you ask an appropriate question, that's big points for them. Don't worry about, in most cases, don't worry about getting the code that you write on a whiteboard perfect. As long as if they call you on it, as long as you recognize the incorrect syntax and you can fix it if they care. What we're usually looking for in these tech interviews, especially for someone right out of school, is that you have the ability to problem solve and use algorithms and data structures appropriately. And when pressed on your usage, you're able to explain why you're using it that way. And like I said, I think practice is the biggest key there. Just running through problems often and in the lead up to an interview. So
thank you, Patrick. So just following up with our question, did you prepare prior to your interviews? Like you said you prepared 2 or 3 weeks before the interview came in. So did you have any preparation before that? Did you start preparing, like going over those books, like cracking the coding interview or some sort?
That is the book that I use the most. There's 2 other books called I think Programming Pearls. There's Programming Pearls 1 and Programming Pearls 2. Those are a little more wordy than Cracking the Coding Interview. They're more how would I phrase it? They're a little more ambiguous in their problem. So I would start with Crack the Coding Interview, and then if you feel like those are getting, like you've memorized those or they're getting to be too much, then I would try Programming Pearls as another recommendation. But yeah, when I interviewed with Amazon, I had no direct experience to go off of. None of my coworkers at the time had interviewed with big tech companies before. My interview at Boeing, by the way, was very hand wavy, like, oh, we have to technically interview you because that's part of our hiring process. But you've been here as an intern a couple times, so I'm just going to ask you a really simple softball question, just so we have it on record that we interviewed you. So when I interviewed at Amazon, it was very new to me, and I think I had cracking the coding interview and basically read through that and just kind of trusted what that said. I think I spent a week and a half or 2 weeks practicing problems there. Spent a lot of time going through the normal interview prep with behavioral questions and answers. But after having experienced the Amazon interview, I realized I would have done better had I spent a little more time on the problems, which is why I spent 3 weeks in the lead up to the interview the second time. So,
thank you so much for sharing that. I'll move on to our last question from Iskander. So he says, do you think Google is the hardest of the FANG companies to get into, or are they more or less on the same level of interview difficulty? Before you answer a question, just want to mention FANG is more the all big tech companies: Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. Just for the audience, you can go on with that.
Yeah. So I honestly don't know. I haven't interviewed at most of the other tech companies. I've interviewed at one of those. I won't say which. Actually, I take that back. being that I worked at Amazon, I interviewed there. I've interviewed at Google, and I've interviewed at one of the other letters. Won't say who. But I found at least that company, Amazon and Google's interview process to be about the same. The interviews themselves were approximately the same. I don't know that I can speak to the like hiring bar at each of the companies. I got an offer from all of those companies that I've interviewed at, and I wouldn't say I'm like a top tier engineer. I've worked with some engineers that blow my mind. Like, I don't understand how they can do it. So, no, I wouldn't say Google is the hardest. I wouldn't know how to rank them, to be honest. And I would throw a couple other companies in there that are, I have coworkers that have interviewed at and said basically it's the same across the board with these companies. They all ask, most of their interviews are 4 to 5 1-hour interviews. So you end up spending a half day being grilled, which is hard no matter how you cut it. They all ask very technical questions. I think most of the companies have pushed by the wayside all of the like trick, kind of old school trick questions that you hear about. No one's going to ask you how many marbles fit in a Volkswagen Bug or whatever weird, irrelevant questions you've heard. So yeah, I think they're more or less the same difficulty across the board for a lot of the Bay Area tech companies.
All right. Thank you everyone for your questions. Some great questions. So I'll just follow up on that. So does that mean preparing for one company, say Google, will help you to interview in all other big tech companies?
I would say so, yeah. If no matter what, I would say do your homework, especially if you get an interview offer. Do your homework. Go read their careers page. I know Google has a google.com/careers has a page that there's a couple of like sample interview questions where we actually have engineers do a mock interview and walk you through what they're looking for and give you some examples and stuff. Other companies that I have not interviewed at, I've heard do actual paired programming. So you'll sit down with someone for half a day and actually build something together, and they'll use that as the basis of your interview. But yeah, generally speaking, though, I think prepping with practice problems and reviewing your algorithms textbook, making sure you understand binary trees and the whole. I haven't interviewed in a while, and I don't use these mostly day to day, so I can't recall them all off the top of my head. But making sure you understand kind of the core computer science algorithms and data structures, I think will help you across the board. So
you kind of mentioned you don't use this day-to-day activity. So what does a day look like for a software engineer at Google? So what does a day look like?
For me, it depends on the time of the year, but I can kind of give you a good picture, kind of a generalized picture of my past, 12 years. There's a lot less coding than you would expect. So especially as you level up, as you get more responsibilities, I would say probably a third to half of my day is communicating, either meetings, code reviews, design reviews. So a lot of the kind of overhead of teamwork is a good chunk of my day. Making sure that my teammates can make progress, making sure that my teammates have everything they need from me to get their work done is a big chunk of it. I would say probably another third of it is actually writing code, writing the actual functional code, writing tests for it. And then another small chunk of that is actually, let me break meetings out of the first part. I would say that the rest of it would be meetings of some sort. Meetings, especially as you grow and you start getting some opportunity to lead teams, all the different forms of meetings become a bigger and bigger part of your life. But generally speaking, I would say you probably spend a little less than half of your time actually writing code and testing, and the majority of your time is spent preparing in some way, shape, or form to write that code. So whether that's writing design docs, reviewing others' design docs, reviewing others' code, in design reviews, that sort of thing. So, yeah.
So less coding and more meetings.
Yeah, I mean, I think most careers end up that way. Most college careers end up that way. There are more meetings than you thought there would be. But as I say, that's kind of it's one of the things that you don't necessarily expect in college. You spend so much time in college just trying to get stuff done, working on your assignments, etc., that you spend most of the time in college writing either code or papers or doing research, whatever. When you get into industry and you realize you're doing less that's solely relying on you and more on your team as a whole or on the organization you're part of, you spend a lot more time interacting with others than than I think you do in school. So.
Great. All right,
Yeah.
we have another question from John. So it says, do you recommend pursuing a master's degree immediately after completing a bachelor's degree?
I would say it depends on your situation. If you had asked me when I was in school, I would have said, why would you waste time on a master's degree? And to be honest, when I started after school, when I was my first year out of college while working, I was making more money than I had ever made in my life. I was like, why would I go? I'm not going back to school. I'm done with that. It's done. But I soon realized that I was lacking, and this is me. This doesn't necessarily apply to everyone else, but for me, I was a computer engineer. I had some computer science courses. I had no software engineering courses. I didn't understand a lot of the process involved in software development, and so I had a hard time kind of moving from a computer engineering degree directly into the software only world. And so for me, I started realizing, hey, I'm missing something. There's something here that I need to get better at, and I can try to read all of the documentation that each individual company puts together on their own processes that kind of mimic some other process. I thought that since I have access to essentially a free master's degree that turned out to not be free, but worth it, and I had the time, why not? So I went to get my master's degree within a couple years after graduating. It was definitely beneficial for me in getting the attention of recruiters. I had purely defense industry work on my resume, and generally speaking, I don't think most big software companies are looking for defense contracting engineers. And when I got Carnegie Mellon on my resume, that was a big draw, I think. But I will say that the education that I got from Carnegie Mellon was top notch. I learned a ton about software process, software engineering as a whole. I mean, that's what the focus of it was. But so I don't know, if you plan well, I think in your bachelor's, and you take a couple software engineering courses and you want to do software engineering for your career, I think you would probably be fine without going straight for your master's afterwards. And I would say I wouldn't encourage anyone to stay in school longer just to get a name on their resume. But if you think there's more to learn before you're ready to start, then I would certainly urge you to pursue a master's. Yeah. I will say that industry experience is probably going to be more influential in your ability to get jobs than a master's degree. Generally. In my case, maybe not, but generally I think that's true.
Thank you, Patrick. So you did your master's, did a computer engineering bachelor's. So did everything that you learned in the classroom help you in your job? Like, were you applying what you learned in your job, or was it not so much useful?
That's hard to say, because I think a big part of your bachelor's program is teaching you kind of the fundamentals that you might not, like I said, the questions that I answer in an interview, in a tech interview, I don't necessarily have to use those skills directly day to day. And a lot of what you do in a tech interview is kind of demonstrating what you learned in your core computer science degree. A lot of the data structures, algorithms. I mean, that is basically what computer science, bachelor's program in computer science sums up to be, right? I don't necessarily need to do binary, need to like pick the appropriate data structure every single day, but knowing what's available to me, and I think part of the bachelor's computer science program is kind of like rewiring your brain to be better at problem solving. I think that stuff I use daily. I wouldn't say that I'm referencing my textbooks from my degrees. My master's degree is a little bit different. That was, like I said, that was a software engineering degree. And that was focused mostly on process and how you as an engineer play into that process. And that I use day to day, and that I'm actually applying currently on a team that doesn't have much process, and we're trying to improve it. So my master's program, I think, was very beneficial to my understanding of my career and the part I play in it. The computer engineering degree, I think, built a lot of the fundamentals that I use, but I wouldn't say I necessarily am recalling individual things that we discussed in class and using that day to day. I don't know if that's a solid answer to what you were looking for, but
yeah, that kind of answers my question. So the last question I have for myself is, if you were never been contacted by Amazon or Google, would you still be applying to those companies, or would you be?
I don't know, honestly. I think if the recruiters hadn't reached out, I probably still at some point would have applied. And maybe I would have gotten lost in the noise because so many people apply to these companies. Maybe I wouldn't have. As a student that attended, as a student that almost failed at being a student, and then got my act together and got my degree from a state school, and I ended up going to work for a defense contractor on something. I can't talk about what exactly I worked on because of agreements, but it wasn't that interesting. I probably would have had a bit of a complex, like, I want to work on something else, but I don't think I'm going to do it. I'll apply. We'll just see what happens. I probably would have applied to the companies. I don't know how it would have all turned out. I don't know if I would have had the same um, kind of confidence to go in to practice and think that the practice actually helps. I might have had a little bit worse of an outlook on things and maybe not practice as much. And I don't know. All of that said, I would encourage everyone here, especially those of you graduating soon, looking for work after you're out of college, apply to everything that you find interesting. Recruiters are an easy way into a company, but it's not the only way into a company. So apply even to the companies that you think you might not be quote unquote good enough for. I didn't think I was good enough for Amazon. I didn't think I was good enough for Google. I didn't think I was good enough for Boeing. And actually, I should point out, this is a very common problem in software. It's probably a common problem in a lot of the thought and problem-solving heavy careers. But if you ask most people at Google, if you ask everyone at Google, I would guess the vast majority would say that everyone I work with is smarter than me. Like, I shouldn't be here. We call it, I'm sure you've heard it, it's imposter syndrome. Everyone thinks that everyone else is better than them because what they say all comes naturally. No one else has the same concerns and worries and frustrations that you do. So I would encourage you to, regardless of what recruiters are saying or how many pings you're getting in your LinkedIn inbox, apply to places. You never know where something is going to, where you have something specific they're looking for, or where you might just stick out from the noise because of something you have on your resume, or because you had a great phone interview, or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
I think Patrick, it's about imposter syndrome. I think it's a really good topic to discuss about. But I know we talked about different things, your interview experience and tips about how Google is in getting the interview. So last will be, for students like us applying to all those companies, being in the crowd, we obviously won't be contacted by recruiters, not all of them. So how do you stand out from those crowds? Like, what do you do? What do you put in your resume besides a master's degree? What do you do by yourself to stand out from the crowd?
I alluded to it earlier, but experience. It's a chicken and an egg problem, right? Like, how do I get experience if I don't have a job? But I would say, for those of you, if you're having trouble standing out in the crowd right now, if you're having trouble getting an internship, or you don't have an internship, get creative with the way that you get experience. Open source projects are a great way to do this. If you have something you're interested in and there's an open source solution for it, go see if you can help see if you can solve some of the bugs, or a lot of open source projects, I think in October, actually have hackathons on their project. So I would urge you to use that as a avenue while you're waiting for more official ways to earn that experience. If you have the opportunity to do your own thing, build your own project, I have a couple of Android apps that me and some guys that I went to Carnegie Mellon with work on, that we built together. There were needs that we had that weren't quite met with existing Android apps. We wrote our own, and that was a part of what we discussed in my Google interview, was my experience doing that. And inside of Google, moving between projects, that topic has come up a few times as well. So if there's a problem out there that you feel like you can solve better than exists, consider throwing an app together or building a service, or even if you don't have many users, even if you don't build up many users for it, putting something that you launched that works, that you can point people to, is another way to get something you can throw on your resume. Don't be afraid to put that kind of stuff on your resume either, or on your application. I don't know that companies actually look at paper resumes anymore. A lot of times they have you fill out everything on your resume and then attach a PDF that probably gets lost. But when you're filling out your application, don't be afraid to list personal projects as work experience, because while you may not be getting paid for it directly, or maybe you are. If you are, congrats, that's awesome. If you're making money on your personal projects, that's the ultimate dream, I think, for a lot of software engineers. But that counts. That is something that can make you stand out. That is something that can get attention, especially if it's something relevant to the role that you're applying for. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Patrick. Just want to take this time to thank you for joining us, and also all the participants, all the students that have joined today from this session. I do want to mention that we have a hackathon coming up next week. So register yourself. I think it's a great way to stand up in the crowd, like Patrick said. So yeah, thank you so much. And if you have last questions, feel free to shoot out before we run out of time. If not, I would like to just end up with a good thank you.
Of course, thank you for setting it up. And yeah, if any other questions come up afterwards, you have my contact information. Feel free to ask. I can respond to you or directly to anyone who has any questions.
Would you mind putting on your email on the chat by any chance?
Yeah, let me see. I will. Let me give out my. This is my personal email. Being that I'm not representing Google right now, I don't want to give my corporate email. So feel free to email me directly if you have any questions. Like everyone, I'm at home a lot right now, so I should have some time to get back to you pretty quickly.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have shared with you guys the registration page for hackathon. So thank you for joining in. Thank you so much, Patrick, once again. Have a good, wonderful day.
You guys do the same.
Thank you.